and gentlemen, from a shed in his backyard in Rockland County, New York, your host of Stand Up Daily, it's Pete Dominic. All right, happy Monday. Thank you. Oh, hello. Hey, how are you? Good to see you. Thank you very much for joining me here on the podcast and pretending like it's a live show. Someday soon, we will do the live show. I look forward to meeting you. Thank you for listening, for supporting. I hope you had an awesome weekend. Did you? What did you do? How's it going? I had my girls alone because Val flew to Mexico to head to a yoga retreat. She and a friend. She has had worked harder this past year than I think she ever has. 6 days a week, pretty much every week. No time off, hardly at all. And so, well-deserved. Home alone with the girls, trying to get certain things prepared for when she gets back. I mean, some landscaping ideas, hoping to surprise her and have a clean house. So I kept pretty busy all weekend outside, as I like to do. That is my way to relax and de-stress. Planting things. I love it. So inspired by many of you that are planting along with me. Saturday night, I bought myself an expensive bottle of whiskey, $60 Japanese whiskey, and daughters both were out with their friends as things are returning to normal to some extent. And I flipped through the channels. I haven't flipped through the channels in a very long time. I have YouTube TV. I don't have cable, and so I'm looking through what was on. And on the PBS feature offering was the film Inherit the Wind. And I never would have thought that I would have watched Inherit the Wind and drink Japanese whiskey on my Saturday night. I didn't plan to, but that's how it went down. And, man, I really enjoyed that movie. Spent some time looking up the actors and reading about it after. It's fantastic. I watched it, I think, last in high school. Really holds up. It's great. Okay, so a lot to get to today. I have two excellent guests joining me. Senator Mazie Hirono sat down with me virtually, and it was really great. It was magical, as a matter of fact. I've been reading her book, learning about her, an immigrant story. Her mom brought she and her brother and left her other brother behind in Japan when she was 7 years old. She came to the United States of America, to Hawaii, and she grew up to be a lawyer and a congresswoman, a lieutenant governor, and then, of course, a senator from Hawaii who spoke a lot of truth to power during the Trump era. She talks about how she mostly kept quiet, but then couldn't keep quiet anymore and changed the way that she was handling things during the Trump administration. You saw her as a standout prosecutor, more likely, in the confirmation hearings of Brett Kavanaugh and Justice Gorsuch and Amy Coney Barrett, but especially people like Bill Barr. A great question asking her. Also, always asks whether or not they've ever been accused of sexual harassment. And this question, she talks about that there in our interview. Anyway, a great conversation with Mazie Hirono, Senator Hirono. I was really excited to talk to her. It's a big deal for the show, too, to get a United States Senator on. We're getting bigger and bigger. We've got ads. We're getting senators. Thank you for all of those of you that reached out and did comment. Not one person was negative about the ad that I read last week. And everybody's like, go ahead, read an ad. Every other podcast has ads. Good for you. We will keep supporting you with our subscriptions, said many of you. So thank you very much for that. And if you haven't signed up for a paid subscription, this is a daily program. It's my job. I do it every day. It's free, technically, but hopefully you're supporting independent media and have subscriptions to a few or even several different independent media creators, from artists to journalists to whatever I am. All those things, maybe. Anyway, go to patreon.com/Pete Dominic or just click on the paid subscription link in the show notes. Also, leave a review for the show at Apple Podcasts. You hear that on every podcast that you listen to. And so you've got to do it for the show. And thank you very much for those of you who have. The two most recent reviews, by the way, on this podcast, both 5 stars. 9 Sugars writes, random thoughts. I enjoy your show and have been listening for quite a while. Your guests are always knowledgeable and very informative, along with making us, the listeners, think deeply about what was discussed with others and with ourselves. Thanks for being there, Pete, especially in the trying times we've all gone through, both with 45, referring to Trump, and the pandemic, which still isn't quite behind us yet. And also, Ron Man 2020 gave me 5-star review for the podcast and writes, it's great in depth, but lighthearted conversation with various experts. Christian Finnegan is awesome. Would love to hear more from him. Possible team up. You know what? To be in full disclosure, Christian and I have been talking about trying to do a YouTube show, and neither one of us have been able to find the time to make it happen. But I don't mind saying it. It's an idea. And I'd really like to make that happen with him, like once a week, a YouTube show. That'd be really fun, wouldn't it? What are your ideas? You tell me. standupwithpete@gmail.com. Thanks for the reviews on Apple Podcasts. Greatly appreciated, guys. All right, I got the news coming up, but also on today's show, a fascinating conversation, if I do say so myself, with professor and author of a new book about the fracking industry in Pennsylvania, which is so good, and he's so good. It's called Up to Heaven and Down to Hell: Fracking, Freedom, and Community in an American Town. My guest, Colin Jerolmack, Professor Colin Jerolmack, he's at NYU. This is his second book. He wrote a book about pigeons on 3 continents and how they were used. And you know what? This guy was awesome. Like, we became friends for sure. We talked for a long time after the interview. He is a sociologist, an environmentalist, and what's called an ethnographer, where you go and live amongst the people. You embed in a community and report out on any number of issues. And he lived in Pennsylvania, in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, for 8 months, and then visited there for years after, and wrote this book about the fracking industry and what it's done to communities there. And it's so good. And I think our conversation is too. So that is coming up. Senator Mazie Hirono and Professor Colin Jerolmack, both on today's blockbuster, action, informative, educational, enlightening program, Stand Up, episode 338. Shall we do the last 24 in news? Let's go. Let's start just by acknowledging that last night was the Oscar Awards, the Academy Awards, but it was a weird year because the movie theaters weren't really open. It was, I guess, the 93rd Academy Awards, and there were some firsts, and there were some things that happened, and I don't really have much to say about it except for a couple clips to play for you, because Regina King, I guess, opened the awards, which were at, I think, the train station. I don't know. You probably know way more about this than me, and maybe you care about it, maybe you don't. I just wanted to play a couple clips that I thought people spoke well or that were kind of important. And actor and director Regina King, who I've interviewed a couple times, real nice woman, very talented. She acknowledged the hardships of the past year during an opening straight out of the movies. It's like made like a movie, apparently, the award show, directed by Stephen Sondheim. Anyway, here she is at the top.
We are mourning the loss of so many, and I have to be honest, if things had gone differently this past week in Minneapolis, I might have traded in my heels for marching boots. Now, I know that a lot of you people at home want to reach for your remote when you feel like Hollywood is preaching to you. But as a mother of a black son, I know the fear that so many live with, and no amount of fame or fortune changes that. Okay? But tonight, we are here to celebrate.
All right. And then apparently the other big deal was that Chloe Zhao is the first woman of color to win Best Director. And that's for a film called Nomadland, where apparently Frances McDormand, the actress, also won Best Actress. Chloe Zhao also won, the film won Best Film. And here is just a little bit from her thoughtful, poignant speech at last night's Academy Awards.
When I was growing up in China, my dad and I used to play this game. We would memorize classic Chinese poems and texts, and we would recite it together and try to finish each other's sentences. And there's one that I remember so dearly. It's called The 3 Character Classics. And the first phrase goes, 人之初，性本善. People at birth are inherently good. And those 6 letters had such a great impact on me when I was a kid. And I still truly believe them today. Even though sometimes it might seem like the opposite is true, but I have always found goodness in the people I met everywhere I went in the world. So this is for anyone who has the faith and the courage to hold on to the goodness in themselves and to hold on to the goodness in each other, no matter how difficult it is to do that. And this is for you. You inspire me to keep going. Thank you. Thank you.
I like that a lot. I think that's very thoughtful, and I'm glad that I heard it and wanted to share it with you. Also, director and producer Tyler Perry got the Humanitarian Award at the Academy Awards, delivered pretty moving, accepting speech about how his mother inspired him and urged the audience to refuse to hate their fellow humans. I think this is worth sharing, even if you already heard it.
You know, when I set out to help someone, it is my intention to do just that. I'm not trying to do anything other than meet somebody at their humanity. Like, case in point, this one time, I remember maybe it was about 17 years ago, I rented this building and we were using it for production. And I was walking to my car one day and I see this woman coming up out of the corner of my eye and I say, she's homeless, let me give her some money. Judgment. I wish I had time to talk about judgment. Anyway, I reach in my pocket and I'm about to give her the money. She says, "Excuse me, sir, do you have any shoes?" It stopped me cold because I remember being homeless and having one pair of shoes and they were bent over at the heel. So I was like, yeah. So I took her into the studio. She was hesitant to go in, but we went in. We go to wardrobe and there are all these boxes and everything around the walls and fabrics and racks of clothes. So we ended up having to stand in the middle of the floor. So as we're standing there, wardrobe, we find some shoes. We help her put them on. I stand up. I'm waiting for her to look up. And all this time she's looking down. She finally looks up. She's got tears in her eyes. She said, "Thank you, Jesus. My feet are off the ground." In that moment, I recall her saying to me, "I thought you would hate me for asking." I'm like, how can I hate you when I used to be you? How can I hate you when I had a mother who grew up in a Jim Crow South in Louisiana, rural Louisiana, right across the border from Mississippi, who at 9 or 10 years old was grieving the death of Emmett Till. As she got a little bit older, she was grieving the death of the civil rights boys and the little girls who were in the bombing in Alabama. She grieved all these years. And I remember being a little boy and coming home, and she was at home, like, "What are you doing at home? You're supposed to be at work." She was in tears that day. She said there was a bomb threat, and she couldn't believe that someone wanted to blow up this place where she worked, where she took care of all these toddlers. It was the Jewish Community Center. My mother taught me to refuse hate. She taught me to refuse blanket judgment. And in this time, and with all of the internet and social media and algorithms and everything that wants us to think a certain way, the 24-hour news cycle, it is my hope that all of us would teach our kids, and not only to remember, just refuse hate. Don't hate anybody. I refuse to hate someone because they are Mexican or because they are black or white or LGBTQ. I refuse to hate someone because they are a police officer. I refuse to hate someone because they are Asian. I would hope that we would refuse hate. And I want to take this Jean Hersholt Humanitarian Award and dedicate it to anyone who wants to stand in the middle. No matter what's around the walls, stand in the middle, because that's where healing happens. That's where conversation happens. That's where change happens. It happens in the middle. So anyone who wants to meet me in the middle, to refuse hate, to refuse blanket judgment, and to help lift someone's feet off the ground, this one is for you too. God bless you, and thank you, Academy. I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, Tyler Perry with a very inspiring speech to refuse hate. Loved it. Refuse hate is a great, I like that. That's ringing with me. Also, my friend Trayvon Free won for short action film, and along with his co-writer and director, I believe. And he won for a film, to be fair, called Two Distant Strangers, which shows how deeply we are stuck in a cycle of police violence. And he went right up there and talked about the statistics of police. I mean, he went right into it. And then you got to listen, because his co-director, Martin Desmond Rowe, is a white guy that plays the role of the white guy and just goes and thanks the corporation. Anyway, congratulations to Trayvon. Listen to this.
And the Oscar goes to Two Distant Strangers, Trayvon Free and Martin Desmond Rowe.
Oh, God is so good. Oh, hi. Today, the police will kill 3 people. And tomorrow, the police will kill 3 people. And the day after that, the police will kill 3 people because, on average, the police in America every day kill 3 people, which amounts to about 1,000 people a year. And those people happen to disproportionately be black people. And, you know, James Baldwin once said, the most despicable thing a person can be is indifferent to other people's pain. And so I just ask that you please not be indifferent. Please don't be indifferent to our pain.
We'd like to thank Netflix for giving our short film the chance to be seen by the world. We'd like to thank the Academy.
Okay, so there you go. What guys got to do his part. Martin Desmond Rowe. Film is Two Distant Strangers. It won Best Live Action Short. All right, let's wrap up with the 93rd Academy Awards. Apparently, people were pissed because Chaz Bowman didn't win the award, even though he had passed away. And Anthony Hopkins won the award for Best Actor. And that was a big controversy at the end that was pretty surprising to folks. But other than that, I don't know. I don't know what to tell you about the Academy Awards. I don't think that much about it, but maybe I'll reach out to our friend April Rain and get her on to talk about the importance of diversity, obviously, in the entertainment industry and with these award shows and why it matters. You know who doesn't think there's really any racism in America, though, is apparently, systemically at least, it's the senator from South Carolina, because he has a black friend who's also a senator, Tim Scott. No, I'm talking about Senator Lindsey Graham. He was on Fox News Sunday with Chris Wallace, and I want to share that with you here in the last 24.
Senator, is there systemic racism in this country in policing and in other institutions?
No, not in my opinion. We just elected a 2-term African-American president. The vice president is of African-American Indian descent. So our systems are not racist. America is not a racist country. Within every society, you have bad actors. Reform the police, yes. Call them all racist, no. America is a work in progress, but best place on the planet.
Best place on the planet? Maybe if you're a barnacle, like Lindsey Graham is. Well, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar was asked about those comments when she was on CNN with Jim Acosta, and here is her response to old Lady G.
I mean, Senator Graham basically is trying to tell us that the sky is not blue. It's as if saying, we don't have poverty issues in this country because we have millionaires and billionaires. I really don't know what point he was trying to make with that statement. But it is obvious that we have a long way to go in this country if we have lawmakers who are refusing to acknowledge the fact that there is, institutionalized racism that is embedded within our systems that we need to actively work in rooting out.
All right. Well explained by Congresswoman Ilhan Omar. I think that's the perfect way to explain it. And now let's go to my favorite weekend show, Saturdays and Sundays, 8 to 10, hosted by my friend Ali Velshi, who had the great Brittany Cooper on his program. She is a professor at Rutgers University. And I just thought this was fantastic. I heard it and definitely wanted to make sure I shared it with you. And Velshi was doing a segment in reference to the fact that not only are Republican legislatures trying to make it harder to vote, they're also trying to make it harder to protest. As the nation reacts to all of these horrible situations, controversies, the guilty verdict in the Derek Chauvin trial, killing of George Floyd, Republican-led states are introducing all kinds of new measures governing protests, making it harder and punishing people for practicing their First Amendment rights.
But a lot of people in America who would say, well, if you're conducting unlawful assembly, you should be in trouble, except so many of our lawmakers, so many of the people who changed the unjust laws in this country did so through unlawful assembly, including Martin Luther King. The concept of riots, which are determined locally by police, you could get stuck by just showing up in something that someone decided was a riot.
Look, I think the thing we have to be clear about is that the GOP has abdicated their investment in governing. They're not giving us any semblance anymore that they care about rights or protection of rights or humanity. They are engaged in a brazen, sort of consolidation of white power. That is what this is all about. Appeals to truth, to justice, to notions of rights. Don't compel them anymore because they see a country being taken away from them. They see a country moving too fast. They see a country becoming too inclusive. And so they're trying to consolidate power. The second thing is that one of the sort of hallmarks of white supremacy is that it always values property over life. And so when you see these kinds of, perverse bills that say you must protect your monuments or you can't get state funding, that's actually part and parcel of how white supremacists have thought about what it means to be a part of the body politic, that these are the same people who turned people into property. And so certainly they have always cared more about property than about life. And so, I think we should stop trying to figure out where the moral compass is or what they're trying to do. They don't care anymore about the function of good government. They care. And finally, let me say this. The Capitol riots, that's the only civil disobedience that they think is okay, is an actual takeover of state power. Then they recognize it. But for the rest of us, they see other people's protest for justice as an attempt at a coup, and they see their own attempts at a coup as their desperate plea for justice. And when your thinking is so perverse and shifted, there's really nothing else we can do.
Very well said by Professor Crunk. That's her Twitter handle. Brittany Cooper on Velshi. And let's head over to CBS, where John Dickerson was the moderator for Face the Nation. And he had Congresswoman Val Demings and former chief of police, and I think it was Orlando, on to talk about. He asked her specifically about the Michaela Bryant shooting. Police shot this 15 or was it 16-year-old girl in Columbus, Ohio, when she had a knife in her hand, and she was going after. There was a fight. She herself called the police, is my understanding. Maybe I have that wrong, but anyway, listen to this with Congresswoman Val Deming, who's, of course, a black woman and a former chief of police, and she was on CBS's Face the Nation.
Let me ask you about the George Floyd Policing Act and this awful incident, Ma'Khia Bryant in Ohio. So as I understand it, under the legislation, federal officials, police officers, they would be restrained from using excessive force unless a third party was in danger and unless they couldn't de-escalate. Those seems to be the facts of the case in the Bryant case, which means that under the standards set in the Floyd Policing Act, the officer in that case seems to have acted as they were trained and supposed to.
Well, John, when I served as a police chief, what I prayed for daily was that my police officers would respond as they are trained to do. Now, after every incident, we would have to go back and look at our policies and make sure that the policies met the moment. But look, I worked as a social worker with foster care children. So it's a sad moment for me. But I also was a patrol officer who was out there on the street having to make those split-second decisions. Now everybody has the benefit of slowing the video down and seizing the perfect moment. The officer on the street does not have that ability. He or she has to make those split-second decisions, and they're tough. But the limited information that I know in viewing the video, it appears that the officer responded as he was trained to do, with the main thought of preventing a tragedy and a loss of life of the person who was about to be assaulted.
Oh, man, I was pretty disappointed with that response from Val Demings on that. I mean, I don't know, the way I see it, that maybe it was their training. If someone has a knife in their hand, you're supposed to shoot them. But why is that their training? I don't know what I'm talking about at all. But why isn't the first bullet a rubber bullet? Why wasn't there any kind of other non-lethal weapon he could use? Why couldn't he just get involved and tackle the girl? I mean, there's so many other things that he could have done than shot her 4 times. I'm confused as to why these 4 folks who are kind of borderline former police officers or police advocates that are walking the edge, they can't explain that. So I didn't quite agree with that, but what do I know? Moving on. Here's somebody who does know something. It's Dr. Keith Mays of University of Minnesota, of course, where a lot of this violence has been taking place recently. He was on Meet the Press I thought this was a good back and forth.
In the county of Hennepin, in the city of Minneapolis, there are names that that everybody just knows now, and Daunte Wright's been added to it. What does this verdict mean to you, and what do you think the impact will be in your home state?
I think the verdict was just. I think it was correct. It was right. But here's the thing, Chuck. 6 black people lost their lives at the hands of police after the verdict. So what does that suggest? We now hear that Merrick Garland and the DOJ will come in to do another investigation. But they did one in 2015 in January. And then tragically, we lost a young man named Jamar Clark. And then the DOJ came in and did another study about police accountability and police misconduct. And then we had the murder of George Floyd in 2020. Now the DOJ is coming back again. And so the beat goes on, Chuck. I think we can celebrate the verdict in the Chauvin trial, but the question must be asked, will police behavior really change? And since that verdict, which was rendered on Tuesday, all the evidence says that nothing has changed. And so we definitely have to pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act to begin to deal with this issue on a systematic level.
All right, there is some clips, well, pretty much all of it, from the Academy Awards to those Sunday show clips. Everything has been about racial injustice, police abuse, law enforcement reform. And now I want to change to the other big major subject and topic, which is all things COVID. COVID-19 pandemic-related headlines. The EU is set to let vaccinated U.S. tourists visit this summer, apparently. That's pretty interesting and important. South Florida's hospitals are admitting more COVID patients as variants spread, and apparently a lot of these people are young people. And that didn't affect, however, northern Florida, because that's happening in South Florida, where in Jacksonville over the weekend, a packed crowd of stars, celebrities everywhere at night that a lot of folks have been waiting for. It was a mixed martial arts UFC fight, a sold-out crowd of just over 15,000 people. UFC 261 were at the ViStar Veterans Memorial Arena, so that can't be a great place to have been. Costa Rica hits new daily record of COVID-19 infections. Germany is facing lockdowns until June, as their curbs have failed to push down cases. U.S. is now finally going to send vaccine materials and other supplies to hard-hit India, whose government is ordering social media to block posts criticizing its response to the country's raging COVID crisis. Huge stories, horrible stories coming out of India. Cases are remaining high, however, back here in the U.S., but vaccinations are slowing. Michigan's COVID wards are filling up with younger patients. And there's summer camp guidance from the CDC, which is keep your masks on, keep distancing. We'll see if that changes. A wave of infections engulfed Thailand, prompting restrictions on localities and incoming travelers. And here is Dr. Fauci on CNN with Jim Acosta talking about masks outside.
And you said this morning that you believe the CDC will soon be updating its guidelines around outdoor mask use. I mean, that is a question that's top of mind for so many people. They say, well, I go out, I get both vaccines. What should we expect in terms of mask guidance for people who have been vaccinated?
Yeah, Jim, I don't want to come out ahead of a CDC announcement, but as you hinted yourself just now a moment ago, that very soon, imminently, in the next few days, very likely, the CDC will be coming out with updating their guidelines of what people who are vaccinated can do, and even some who are not vaccinated. And certainly what one can do outdoors vis-a-vis masks is going to be one of those recommendations. So stay tuned. It's coming soon.
All right. And if you don't mind, I'll press a little bit. I know you don't want to get ahead of these guidelines, but I assume airports, travel, that sort of thing, that'll be coming up as well.
Well, sooner or later, I don't know if it's all going to be coming out at once. I mean, the one thing for sure is the thing that's on a lot of people's minds is what about outdoors? Because obviously a lot of people are going to be spending a lot of time more outdoors now because the weather is getting really nice, beautiful spring weather. You're going to be seeing people wanting to do things outdoors without masks. And it's common sense to know that the risk when you are outdoors, which we have been saying all along, is extremely low. And if you are vaccinated, it's even lower. So you're going to be hearing about those kinds of recommendations soon.
And, of course, the pause on the Johnson & Johnson vaccine was lifted on Friday. And Chuck Todd had Anthony Fauci's boss, Francis Collins, who is the head of the National Institute of Health, on. I thought this was a good question. Listen to this.
How rare it is for this to happen. Can you give viewers a layman's comparison here? What is a common drug that is out there that people take where it would be, you would almost have be at higher risk of this than you would with this J&J vaccine?
Well, think about aspirin. All of us have been taking aspirin for headaches and muscle aches for the last many decades. The risk of aspirin inducing a significant intestinal bleed is much higher than what we're talking about here. Something in the neighborhood of 1 in 500, 1 in 1,000 for people who regularly take aspirin. We're talking about something here is about 1,000 times less likely to happen. But we Americans, we're not that good at this kind of risk calculation. Something sounds scary. Somebody has pointed out you are less likely as a woman taking J&J to have this blood clotting problem than to get struck by lightning next year. So it's a really low risk. And we do figure out how to do that. We wear our seat belts, right? What are you doing there? You're trying to prevent a bad outcome if you're in a car crash. Back when seatbelts were first being introduced, people were like, well, you know, suppose my car goes into a lake and I can't get unbuckled quickly enough and I drown. Well, okay, I guess that's in there too. Yeah. But balancing the benefits and the risks, which is what we're trying to do here, you come out pretty clearly on the side of roll up your sleeve.
There you go, Francis Collins on Meet the Press. And finally, Mehdi Hasan has a show on Sunday nights. He does this 1-minute rant, and on Mondays when I remember it, I always try to grab it. And here is his performance from last night.
It's time now for what I call the 60-second rant. Start the clock. A bill to combat anti-Asian hate crimes and discrimination is about to become law. The COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act cleared the Senate last week in a 94-1 vote in its favor. Yeah, you heard that correctly. 94-1. One senator actually voted against the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, Republican Josh Hawley of Missouri, who tried to justify his shameful vote against the bill, tweeting that it, quote, turns the federal government into the speech police, gives government sweeping authority to decide what counts as offensive speech, and then monitor it, raises big free speech questions. No, it doesn't. It expedites the federal government's review of hate crimes related to COVID-19, and it gives state and law enforcement more resources to track hate crimes. Remember, anti-Asian hate crimes jumped by about 150% last year in 16 of the largest U.S. cities. I mean, even Ted Cruz and Ron Johnson voted for this bill. Rand Paul, who once tried to block an anti-lynching bill. Well, he didn't vote for the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, but at least he didn't vote against it, like Hawley did. It raises questions about free speech. Come on. Then again, if I was the guy who was photographed doing this to a bunch of racist, violent insurrectionists, I'd be worried about hate crimes legislation getting passed as well.
Well, there you go. Cheesy music and all, Mehdi Hasan. And speaking of that legislation, I have the woman who basically authored it in the United States Senate, Senator, Dr. Professor, I called her everything but her actual title, Senator Mazie Hirono joins me coming up. But first, that is the last 24. This, however, is the news dump. Everything else I have. Rapid fire headline. Let's do it. Pete Coe with another jingle.
Shouty maskless man at that gasoline pump. Luckily he'll be gone by today's news dump. We want our freedom for the world.
Shouty maskless man. Oh, well done, Pete Coe. Very well done. All right, here are your headlines that aren't necessarily politics or COVID related, but they are important and maybe even undercovered. It's the news dump. Bloomberg is reporting that grocery price shocks are coming to a store near you. Apparently corn, wheat, soybeans, vegetable oils, small handful of commodities from the backbone of much of the world's diet. They're dramatically more expensive. Flashing alarm signals for global shopping budgets. So look into that story. I think I mentioned this story a couple news dumps ago last week, but New Hampshire Senate has advanced their pet parity bill, which would require drivers to report collisions with cats as well as dogs. State law already requires those who run over dogs to notify either police or the animal's owner or else face a $1,000 fine. Now the Senate voted 20-4 on Thursday to add cats to the reporting requirement as well. Who are the four that did not want to add cats to that requirement? Can you imagine the attack ads for that person, those senators?
when he had the chance to vote to put cats on the parody bill, he said, meow.
What? Alaska Airlines has banned the state senator for violating mask rules. The Associated Press reports that Alaska Airlines banned Senator Laura Reinhold, that she's not permitted to fly anymore on Alaska Airlines as long as her continued refusal to comply with employee instruction regarding the current mask policy. The United Kingdom's biggest roller coaster broke down near the top, forcing riders to climb down the 200 feet. It's called The Big One is the name of the roller coaster. And people were stranded at the highest point. Park staff was forced to scale the roller coaster before tentatively guiding nervous visitors to safety by making them walk down. No, thank you. Imagine if they complained and didn't get free tickets. What are they going to get for that? Oh, I love this story. These assholes, the father and 3 sons accused of selling industrial bleach as a miracle cure, are now facing federal charges, according to the Associated Press. The Grennan family, Grenon, look them up, could face life sentences if convicted in connection with a product called Miracle Mineral Solution. If you hear about that, if someone tries to sell that to you or anybody you know, it's bad. It's bleach. The FDA says actually it becomes chlorine dioxide once ingested. A bleach typically involve the treatment of textiles, industrial, water, pulp, and paper. And they are in real trouble there. The FDA issued a warning about the product, which the guys were making in a shed in their backyard. How about that, in their shed? I'm making something hopefully enlightening and informative and maybe even entertaining. They're making bleach as a medicine. So sometimes people do bad things in a shed. Hundreds of people gathered in Nebraska to battle over the name Josh. Hashtag Josh Fight happened Saturday in Lincoln, Nebraska. Drew a crowd from around the country to Nebraska Saturday for a heated pool noodle brawl. Apparently a whole bunch of guys that a year ago when pandemic boredom set in wanted to have a fake fight, a ridiculous. This is a weird thing. I don't even understand what happened, but I did see that over the weekend and took note. Wanted to share it with you. Look it up if that sounds like a story you'd be interested in reading about. Over the weekend, we also learned that the Indonesian submarine that had gone missing apparently sank, and the entire crew was declared dead. That's a horrible story. Also, an oxygen tank blast fire killed 82 in a hospital in Iraq. Apparently, Elon Musk is going to host Saturday Night Live for some weird reason. And a woman was apparently charged with a felony over a 22-year late VHS tape. And the tape was Sabrina, the Teenage Witch. In 1999, someone rented this tape, and it went unreturned. And this month, a 52-year-old Texan was horrified to learn that the over 20-year-old mistake has since ballooned into a felony crime, according to USA Today reporting. Again, the headline, a woman was charged with a felony for not returning a VHS tape. She found out 21 years later. Yikes. All right, that is all I've got for you on the news dump. I have 2 amazing guest interviews that I'm really happy to share with you. And first, I'm excited to share my conversation with Senator Mazie Hirono, whose new book is so good. And then coming up, I've got Professor Colin Jerolmack, whose book is also amazing. We had a great conversation. But first, it's the senator from Hawaii on Stand Up with Pete Dominick. How cool is that? The new book is Heart of Fire, an immigrant daughter's story, and I kept the very beginning on. I was so giddy and excited to meet her. This is so genuine. After reading her book and prepping to interview her, my respect for her grew so much, and I wanted to make sure that she knew it right there at the top. And, well, here's my conversation with Senator Mazie Hirono about her new book, which I highly recommend you get, Heart of Fire, an immigrant daughter's story.
Hi, Pete. I'm here.
I'm ridiculously excited to be talking to you.
Oh, thank you.
You are.
I like your enthusiasm.
You are a hero of mine, and
oh wow.
Yeah, I'm trying to as a matter of fact, encourage my daughters who are just inside. I work out of a shed to maybe come out and meet you, because
I love to meet them.
I'm gonna cry just talking to you. I'm very, very excited to see you. Thank you very much for joining me. I think you're an amazing human being and hero, and your leadership has been really important in the scariest time, at least of my generation's life. So thank you very much for joining me. Should we jump right into it?
Yes.
Okay. First, want to just start with before we get to your book, which I've already talked about in the introduction, which I'm so moved. And I think more than anything else, obviously I have a blind spot for most cultures that aren't my own. But you're Japanese American. When you talk about that, you talk about, obviously Hawaii is its own culture. So I've learned so much, but I'm really most, I think, inspired by or moved by the way that you talk about women and girls, and the way that you've led and talked about why it's so important to you. But I want to start with the legislation which you sponsored, which you came up with about a month ago, I guess, just passed, which is huge. And it passed in every single senator, including every Republican but one, apparently voted for it. And his name is Josh Hawley. And my question is, what was this legislation for, and what is wrong with that broken man?
We know that there's been such a huge rise in hate crimes against Asian American Pacific Islanders, and we've all seen the videos of people, being kicked and assaulted. This is happening in all 50 states and DC. So this kind of crimes and incidents against the APIs really arose during the pandemic, when you have a president talking about it as a China virus, and his administration calling it the Kung Flu. You create an environment where the animus against the other, that would be Asians, we're perpetual foreigners, even if we've been in this country for decades. And so this kind of animus comes to the fore. And it was really important. Two reasons that I think the passage of this bill so important. One is that it actually creates support and a database for reporting of these crimes, so we can figure out how to prevent them and do something about it in a productive ways based on evidence. Wow, how unique. And then the second thing is, it was so important for the Congress to stand with the API community, which feels very much under siege and often invisible. So I know how important it was for Congress to take this stand, to say, we stand with you, our friends in the AAPI community. And yes, one person could not bring himself, and he gave a really lame excuse that I won't even dignify. And so, there he was, even Ted Cruz and the other people who tried to amend the bill out of existence, at the end voted for the bill.
Yeah, I watched that back and forth. I've prepared so much to talk with you today, including watching your questioning of the most powerful men of our time, arguably the three Supreme Court justices, I think, at least, right? That you
yes.
that had to not confirm, but question, which you did an excellent job at. And of course, Bill Barr, which I think was one of the most powerful moments that we saw in that. And I want to just look back at those 4 years. I mean, thank goodness for people like you on the Judiciary Committee. But when you look back at any of those hearings, and you write about all of them, and excuse me, in your excellent book, what stands out to you specifically about the Brett Kavanaugh hearing? I wanted to ask you about.
This was a hearing where that was just. I can't express. I'm already going to be voting against him even before Dr. Ford came forward with her allegations. That not to have those allegations investigated really showed me that we had not come far from the Anita Hill days in that committee and as a Senate. And so we had what I would call a half-assed so-called investigation only after. But basically, we had a Republican senator who said, "I can't vote for getting this person out until there's an investigation." But it was a very, very limited investigation, and to know that this woman who came forward who was so composed, telling her story, was totally believable. And then you have Brett Kavanaugh going off the rails, ranting, crying, attacking the Democrats on that committee of some sort of conspiracy against him. You know, this kind of behavior led over 1,000 law school professors to write a letter to the committee saying this person has no business. He doesn't have the demeanor or the comportment to be on the Supreme Court. So there's that. If a woman had acted that way, if Dr. Ford had behaved that way, she would have been just totally dismissed. But a man behaving that way, after the whole thing, one of my colleagues said, he was treated so badly. And I just thought, what are you talking about? There's just, it was amazingly horrible experience. And now he sits on the Supreme Court for life.
How do you feel about changing or court reform as it's called?
I have been a supporter of court reform, and there are different ways that you can do it. Yep. Adding to the court, sure, that's one way. But another way is possibly some kind of term limits or cycling the circuit court judges through the Supreme Court. Clearly, we need to apply the ethics provisions to the Supreme Court in a very strong way. And so there are a number of things that we can do, because right now we have the potential for a lot of 6-3 decisions coming out of this court. And who would have thunk it that Roberts would be this moderating force, That's how far to the right this court has come. 63 decisions are not good for our country, because those are decisions that you would be able to define and describe as being ideologically driven and not based on precedent and the law.
Precedent. Yeah, they threw that out yesterday, I think. So you write about this time that we went through, really graphically and specifically about Trump's election and how even after the Access Hollywood tape came out, he still was elected. Then we're talking about Brett Kavanaugh. And during that time, so many women and so many survivors of sexual violence had to revisit the worst moments in their lives. I saw women like just being broken, at least temporarily. Yes. But of course, then being inspired by it all. I was there in Washington, D.C. covering the Women's March. And I know that you had this connection with Christine Ford, and then you actually spoke to her. She reached out to you after the confirmation hearings. What did you discuss with her? Why did she reach out to you?
Dr. Ford and her family are frequent visitors to Hawaii. She likes to surf. And so she called me and asked to see me. And I asked her to come to my office because she's so well known. And so she came. But I was so astounded when she said, "I came to thank you for supporting me." And I said, no, I want to thank you for the courage that you had to speak out. And yes, you're right that a lot of women started to come forward and speak about the most terrible experiences. I had longtime friends who spoke about their attempted rapes and rapes that they had never talked about before. So this kind of behavior, totally unacceptable, has been going on since, I said, time immemorial. And it is one of the reasons that I ask every nominee the questions relating to whether they've ever asked for sexual favors or engaged in sexual harassment on the record and under oath.
That's such an important question that you always ask. It's so sad that you have to, but you do have to, and I'm so glad that you do. You know, during that time, you said something that was so helpful, I think, and inspiring to me about kind of, and I stole it and used it right away on all of my broadcasts, which was for men, it's, shut up. Just shut up. What I started doing is just asking questions. You mentioned women revisiting their trauma. I asked my wife of 20 years, is there anything that you never told me? Because I know that she had been through pretty much every type of abuse. And she told me a situation that I'd never heard. And so the point is, I think your advice is so well given to shut up and listen. How are we doing? And more specifically, how are the men in the Senate that you work with doing, both on the Democratic side and the Republican side?
Listening is not often practiced enough in the Senate, that's for sure. And so when I was asked by a reporter during the Kavanaugh time whether I felt, as a woman on the Judiciary Committee, whether I felt a special responsibility to deal with this issue, and that's when I said, wait a minute, it's the men in the country who are mainly the actors in these things. And so I just said, you men out there, this was definitely not planned, by the way. Most of the kinds of things that I say, I think about it, but the words that come out are not exactly planned. So I just said, you men out there, just shut up and step up and do the right thing for a change. So yes, I do have my detractors, but they don't bother me. It doesn't bother me. So I'm so glad. I didn't know that you got something out of that.
Yeah, I went on TV shortly after that, around that time, and the anchor, it was a panel of women, and for whatever reason, he ended on me. He's like, Pete, what's your advice to men? And I just said, after seeing you, I said, listen. You just listen. Shut up. Ask questions and listen. And if it's uncomfortable, then it's just one iota of what the person who you're listening to has felt. It's so important that we just listen and try to understand, which is another great thing about talking to you and really reading your book. I mean, because I'm listening, not only, I've always tried my best to listen to women and minorities, but like your perspective is so interesting as an immigrant to this country. You tell your story, which is so specific and personal and important for any legislator, any lawmaker, and clearly instructs your entire career at every office that you have held. Specifically, you can relate to child separation intimately. Tell us why.
When my mother brought the two older kids, that would be me and my older brother, to this country, it was because we were old enough to go to school, and she made a really tough decision to leave my younger brother in the care of my loving grandparents who raised me from the age of 3. And so she did not realize, and we didn't until later, that this caused such trauma. The family separating from his mommy was such a trauma to my younger brother that, we didn't know about it. And therefore, of course, we knew after he came to our country and how he just struggled through school and all of that the trauma of separation is deep and lasting. When I saw Trump in his mindless cruelty, separating thousands of children from their parents, and he obviously didn't care, because when the judge in California said, you will bring them back together, they didn't even have the information on where the parents are. So that is lasting damage that we've done to these children. That is why we need to have a humane immigration policy, something that the former president never cared about, and left Joe Biden with a shredded immigration system, which will take time to rebuild into a humane system.
There's so much to talk about with you and so little time that I've got, but I do, want to try to hit some of these top line issues, which of course you are a credible expert on. And again, using your lived experience, you write intimately about your stage 4 cancer diagnosis back in, what year was it now? 2017, I think.
2017.
And how you dealt with that, which is just wild. It was much different than how I would have dealt with it. And how it instructed you on the issue of healthcare. I think you write something about how, having lived that experience and seen what others, of course, are going through with healthcare in your family and in your state, how could Republicans vote to repeal the healthcare access that was so hard fought and won? Where are we on healthcare for your constituents in Hawaii, and where we're at as a country right now? This is such an important issue for progressives still, of course, wanting to get to Medicare for all or something similar.
Healthcare is a right, not a privilege, and Medicare for all is one way that we can do that. Of course, in my own life, to have a mother who didn't have health care, and my great fear was as a child that she would get sick and can't go to work, no pay, no food. That was how things were in our family in the beginning. And so healthcare is truly, when you are so poor, you can't even go to the doctor. That stays with you. And then to get this diagnosis, I had 2 major surgeries, which I would never have been able to afford, if not for healthcare. This is why before the Affordable Care Act was passed, a huge percentage of the personal bankruptcies in our country were due to massive, unforeseen medical bills. That went down, and that's my conclusion about the impact of the Affordable Care Act. And so, yes, this is not it is hard to go talk to my Republican colleagues to say, how could you vote to eliminate healthcare for millions of people just like that? You see, what kind of conversation can I have? They did it. That's what I know.
Before I have to end this, and I'm so sorry to hear about the loss of your mother just a few weeks ago. I feel like I know her after reading your book. And so I just want to ask you this last question. What advice do you have for my daughters? You're a woman of a certain age. You're a Japanese American immigrant. You represent Hawaii. Is there any general advice that you have when talking to young women about what they can learn from your experience, this generation that's dealing with some of them, sadly, the same issues that women your age had to growing up? But I feel like you're so, like, when I watch you and then I watch the Republican senators, especially, it's like there's no comparison with your intellect, with your ability to articulate yourself, with your understanding on policy, with the work that you do. Then you listen to somebody like John Kennedy or Lindsey Graham, who they seem like they don't read. How did they get there? You are so eminently qualified. What do you say to women who are still living in a country and in a world where they have to work so much harder than young men and boys to get the same gains?
I think that's changing. I am more fully myself because I now use my vocal cords. I've always been a very determined person, but to go from a really reserved and pretty quiet kind of person to what I am now is truly a gift to myself, that I can be more fully myself. And that's what I would want for, especially when women, become more fully yourself. And I'm at the point now, it took me a long time to kind of get there. And I don't think I'm there yet, because it's always a matter of becoming. But to speak out, and you know what? I've been called badass. I consider that a compliment, because the best description of a badass woman is somebody who doesn't care if people don't like her. And I'm at the point where I speak up, and I have my detractors, but it's so important for me to speak plainly and to say what I need to say. So I want everyone to be able to relate to this journey of mine, and maybe they can shorten it for themselves.
If I were to describe you in one word, I wouldn't use badass. I would definitely use fearless. Thank you so much for joining me. It's really an honor to talk to you. I hope the opportunity to get to talk to you again and someday get one of those handmade cards that you make. It seems so very, very cool. Yeah. Yes. Thank you, Senator. Really appreciate it. I hope to talk to you again and sometime meet you.
Take care.
Okay.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Be kind.
Thank you. Yeah, Senator Mazie Hirono. That was very cool. And I pressed stop, but then we kept talking for a couple more minutes, and she told me that she was going to send me one of those handmade cards. And then her people reached out to me and asked me for my address. So how about that? I wish I could have gotten the girls to come out, but they were not answering my texts while they were inside on their computers, quote, at school. All right. Well, that was really special and magical, and I hope that you appreciated it and enjoyed it as much as I did. And I look forward to meeting her and having her back on. And here is another first-time guest joining me on Stand Up as well. He has written a great book. He's a professor of sociology and environmental studies at New York University. His last book is called The Global Pigeon, about pigeons on 3 different continents. He lives in New York City, and his new book is about his time studying a community in Pennsylvania dealing with fracking. It's called Up to Heaven and Down to Hell, Fracking, Freedom, and Community in an American Town. I was so excited to meet him and to talk to him. We had a great conversation. I think you're going to really enjoy our conversation and this book. Here I go now with Colin Jerolmack. I'll have to ask you a pigeon question. I hope you don't mind.
Not at all, please.
I mean, you did travel to 3 continents studying how pigeons are profited from, eaten, everything. So I'm recording now, and I'm psyched to finally get you here. We've been trying to make this happen, and so the book is really, really good. I've told everybody all about it, and Colin, great to have you. Professor.
Oh, please. Colin was great.
Let me just, though, establish kind of a little bit about you and your career. I mean, you've got an undergraduate degree in psychology. You've got a graduate degree in sociology. You teach environmental studies at one of the best colleges in the country. My daughter really wants to go to NYU. And I was like, listen, I need more subscribers on the old podcast, or you're headed to state school. But the point is, you have a really interesting kind of background and what you teach, and then even more what you've written, because you are an ethnographer, which is, I think, fascinating. What is that?
I can tell you what an ethnographer is in one word: a stalker.
Well, yeah, you're being self-deprecating, but it's like you're a journalist. Yeah. You're living amongst you're embedded.
Yeah, I mean that I'm joking in a way, but in a sense it's true. But you know, and maybe the easiest way to describe an ethnographer in ways that people might somewhat have a sense of is an anthropologist. So rather than doing surveys of a bunch of people or inviting them into some sterile environment to do an interview, I go where they are and live with them. I live with them and among them and the goal is to really understand the world from their perspective and understand how they make choices and how they live through the everyday events that happen to them. And so, you know, generally that means being very humble, because it means going into a place not with a set of hypotheses in which you're trying to extract the answers, but to go in there your goal is to try to see the world the way they do. So you're there to be taught by them.
And your background or your education in sociology helps you understand that role, because not all sociologists do that kind of work where they get embedded in the community, right?
That's right. Actually, most sociologists do survey research, and I would say probably the second most common method is interview research. But there is a nice community of ethnographers in sociology. I mean, as I said, this is sort of ethnography is the bread and butter method of anthropology. But there's a fair number of sociologists like myself doing it.
There's no ethical dilemma among sociologists about doing it that way, right? Because the only thing I can imagine is that you're not honest with the people in the community that you're living with and reporting about what you're doing. But other than that, I couldn't think of anything that would be wrong with it. But is there any issue or question about that type of work ethically amongst sociologists?
Sure. Well, to your first point, those kinds of ethics of deception are almost impossible in the sense that we are required to have our project approved by the university, an ethical review board, and you are not allowed to use deception or even just I can't act like I'm just a community member. I mean, I didn't walk around with a placard on that says I'm an ethnographer, but I had to tell everybody what I was doing. I had to give them a 1-page form that summarizes what I was there and what I was doing, and I have to get their permission to agree to be a part of the study. Within sociology, I think there's two issues. The first one is not so much ethical, but some people have concern that what we find is not, quote, objective. Ethnography trades in relationships. I get people to trust me. That's where the stalking part is not a joke. I mean, I meet you and then I ask you, can I watch you at work? Can I have dinner with you? Can I worship with you at church? And it's out of those long-term trusting relationships that you disclose things to me, that you let me, witness you in the most intimate moments of your lives. And so there's that kind of critique, which I encounter sometimes. But again, the goal actually isn't to be objective. The goal is to understand their subjectivity. The one area where you see some ethical issues are, ethnographers. Most of us don't make a lot of money off our books. Most of them are academic books read by other professors and students. But there is a way that we advance our own careers. I mean, I got my first job out of my first book. It arguably played a large role in me getting tenure at a university. So there's some people that raise questions about exploitation. People share their stories with me, and they do so voluntarily, and they would to a journalist. But some people say, because an ethnographer can trade that in for a professional career, that perhaps they are exploiting people.
I mean, I guess, but if you weren't exploiting them, then the rest of us would never be able to understand them. I mean, the word exploit is, I guess, doing a lot of work, or replacing, what you're actually doing, which is more like a scientific investigation, journalism somehow. Yeah. So, I mean, I keep wanting to ask you questions about kind of the work. I'm just fascinated, especially with sociology. But I think I want to jump into the actual work you're doing and sure. that you've done, and because I think it's so important for so many reasons. Certainly your most recent book is, about obviously the environment, fracking. It's about people's livelihoods, the economy, and certainly about culture, a certain type of culture for sure, and cultural clash within cultures. But you wrote a book about pigeons too, which also deals with human beings. I mean, it wasn't just about, it's actually mostly, I think, what, humans' interaction with pigeons over centuries in different parts of the world, and I guess it's fascinating because apparently they're everywhere. Is that right?
Yeah, the pigeons are on every continent except Antarctica, and they're not interesting. I think a lot of people presume they're native to all these places, but they're not. They're native to the cliffs of coastal North Africa and the Mediterranean. But they were domesticated over 5,000 years ago, the first domesticated bird, one of the first 5 domesticated animals, period, because they're, before we had synthetic fertilizer, their guano, their feces is a rich fertilizer. You can eat them. Squab is juvenile pigeon, which is still served in some restaurants, particularly it's a French delicacy. And of course, you can send messages with them. So if you think thousands of years ago, there weren't telephones, there wasn't even a mail system, you can take a pigeon to a place it's never been. It will find its way home for 1,000 miles. So if you travel somewhere with a pigeon in your pocket or in a little cage, you can then put a message on that and send it back to the place that you left.
And what is the accuracy level of that?
Quite high. I don't know a percentage, but so for instance,
there's never a wrong number.
No, there are.
I don't know this guy. I don't know why is this pigeon knocking on my door.
So a lot of people would send more than one pigeon, but for instance, even today, so people race pigeons.
Yep.
And I hung out with a group of the Bronx Homing Pigeon Club, and these guys would send collectively, they would send maybe 200 pigeons 500 miles away to Virginia, and to fly home, and 90-something% of them would make it home. So you lose some.
Was that a race?
Yeah, that's a race. Yep.
When you said racing pigeons, for some reason I thought it was short distances, around the block, but it's actually very long distances.
Yeah, you don't watch it. You put them on a truck, they drive far away, and then you wait on your rooftop. And generally you don't start waiting on your rooftop till evening, because it's going to be a while, but they will make it home 500 miles in one day. So a couple hours before dusk, you go out, drink some coffee, start hanging out on the roof, and you wait for your pigeon to come home.
Wow, that's still happening right now?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Oh, I want to attend.
You
gotta pay admission. Is this on YouTube? This fat is
$1 million pigeon race. So there's local ones, but there's also the $1 million pigeon race in South Africa, which you can attend and you can watch virtually. And people send pigeons from all over the world.
Well, with that kind of money, those kind of stakes, now it makes me, I haven't read that book, but I can't wait to now after learning about it through this book that we're about to talk about. But that makes me think that these are high stakes. Are these pigeons all roided up? Are they all drugged up? Are they like the racehorses and dogs?
They are tested for drug. So this is the thing is historically pigeon racing was something done by working class people. They would call it the poor man's horse racing. But now it's become this very professionalized thing. So for instance, a pigeon who wins that $1 million pigeon race, the next day they auction off the birds, and that bird might sell for $50,000, $60,000, $80,000.
Oh my God.
Because it's a thoroughbred now, right?
Right.
It's a pigeon that you could breed some winners out of.
Oh, that's great. Oh, that's fascinating. I want to ask you a lot more questions about pigeons, but I really want to talk about this book, so we'll set that up hopefully for another time. Up to Heaven and Down to Hell, Fracking, Freedom, and Community in an American Town. So this is not really that interesting, but I've got a little bit of just anecdotal insight on this because I graduated from Marcellus High School, and it's my understanding that the Marcellus Shale begins there, but maybe I'm wrong about that. But this is a deposit, obviously underground, that goes for hundreds, thousands of miles. That is rich, and that's
from upstate New York down through West Virginia, across Pennsylvania, down through West Virginia.
And so I'm also kind of informed on the movement, the anti-fracking movement in New York, and it's far different than where you spent time in Pennsylvania. And now, just before you and I talked, California announced they're going to ban it in a few years. So the point is, what I'm getting at is fracking and natural gas, as you talk about, it's all over the country. But my big question is, how much do you think the time that you spent to work on this book in Williamsport in Pennsylvania, which you were there for 8 months and then visited for another 6 years? Is that right?
That's right. Yes. That's right.
How, just this big, larger question first, how similar do you think the issues that you write about in this book are to other states that are dealing with the same industry?
Sure. I think that I actually, New York, which of course banned fracking, and California, which now seems set to ban at least with California, from what I just read, new permits. They will still be able to frack all those permits that are going to be, put through the system in the next 3 years. But those two states are more the outliers. Pennsylvania is much more like Colorado, Texas, North Dakota, where where a lot of oil and gas drilling is happening. In Pennsylvania, it's all gas. In Texas, a lot of it is oil. But in that, these are predominantly Republican legislatures that have welcomed with open arms this industry and have more or less done everything possible to allow this industry to take hold and to ensure its continued success. Pennsylvania does not even put a severance tax on gas that is taken out from the ground. It's the only state that doesn't do that. And so, and Pennsylvania, and like these other states like Texas and Colorado, have actually taken away the ability of municipalities and towns to restrict fracking through zoning. So Pennsylvania, so California and New York are more of the outliers, and it makes sense. These are more progressive liberal states. But the other predominant oil and gas producing states, Pennsylvania has a Democratic governor right now, but its legislature is firmly Republican. And so, Pennsylvania is much more like these middle America states in that way.
What does up to heaven and down to hell mean? And why is America apparently the only country, I learned from reading your book, that allows property rights to extend underground? Am I saying it right?
That's correct. Yes. So it is written into American common property law. Whoever owns the soil, it is theirs up to heaven and down to hell. And actually, it used to be up to heaven until air travel, and we had to figure out a way, are we going to pay every individual to when a plane flies over them? So air rights were restricted with the advent of air travel. But before that, you owned all the way up to the atmosphere. And so you still own literally down to the mantle unless those rights have been severed. But the most common form of property ownership is you do own the air rights. So if somebody wants to build something over you, which happens in cities sometimes, they can actually sell those air rights to another building to build over top. So sometimes you'll see this strange building in New York City. There's a few of these, like over a church, right? Like after it gets past the church, the building will be double as wide and go over the church because they've sold those air rights. And, we inherited in America, we inherited our property law from England. So England also had this up to heaven and down to hell clause. However, there was a caveat in England, which was the crown retains the rights to oil, gas, silver, gold. So all the good stuff, anything you might really want, the crown retained the rights to.
And if something becomes good that you didn't know was good, that's ours too. As soon as we realize.
Right.
But not water. And I mean, sure, water is at stake as well. I mean, I have no idea, but maybe it's not. But the water rights seem to be the future concern.
Yeah, and as you may know, here in America, in most of rural America, people get their water just by poking a hole in the ground. And so if that groundwater is taken away, diverted somehow, that becomes a major issue for you. Your home has no value.
Yeah, isn't that what happens with some of these water bottling companies? Like I feel like I read about, I think it's Poland Spring, and they went into Maine and they took all their water that was theirs, not all their water. I'm being hyperbolic, but I do think that's an issue with the bottled water industry. But let's get back to the natural gas industry and fracking. So what was the plan? Like, what is the ethnography abstract? What was the pitch? You were going to go to Penn. I mean, you're also an environmentalist, so you understand all of the issues surrounding the danger of mining and burning natural gas and how horrible methane is and so on. So you did have an understanding clearly of the environmental issues, but maybe not as much about the cultural issues, the property rights and so on. But what was what was the plan?
I have to say, and this is what's can be fun but anxiety producing about being an ethnographer. There was very little plan, believe it or not. So what got me what made me decide to do this was, New York. I was teaching at NYU, and New York at the time had a moratorium on fracking, was deciding whether to make this a ban. So there was a lot of activism around that. I'm from Pennsylvania, southeastern Pennsylvania, but I'm from Pennsylvania, and I heard this report back in 2011 now, so a while ago, but that Pennsylvania was poised to be the Saudi Arabia of natural gas.
Yeah.
And that's big. And I thought, if that's true, this is major. And I'm a sociologist who's interested in communities And so I just sort of thought, like, my approach is always to like dig in closely with a group of people and get to know them and understand big issues through how they're actually lived, rather than step back and do some study from far away. And so I had spent a year or two trying to convince some of my PhD students that somebody ought to go and live in one of these communities and just like see what it's like on the ground. My students were like, I came to NYU because I want to be in New York City. Thank you. I don't want to move. I don't want to move to the middle of Pennsylvania. So I had a sabbatical coming up. And I thought, I guess it's going to be me. And my wife had said to me, I think this project has you written all over it. But as far as you asked what it was the abstract, it was very general. I just said, what does it feel like to actually be in a place, a largely rural place, where this massive industrial process is coming in? And I also did say, a lot of these places like central Pennsylvania have been gutted by deindustrialization. They've been bleeding population, and fracking was promising to bring back jobs, to provide opportunities. And so I thought, let me just see how this is actually transforming rural community life. So that was my sort of main question. The whole property rights thing and how central that was going to be didn't even occur to me until later on.
But if you're living, how do you describe? I'll try to just give the rough analysis, but you write about it in the book. If you're living in a community that there's not a lot of opportunity in terms of ways to make a living, ways to make money, if you're struggling even, and all of a sudden someone knocks at your door and says, all you have to do is rent us your land. Yeah. That's kind of where it begins. And then we can talk about the more affluent people and why they may or may not. But you're also so good and such a great writer. And the way that you lace in people's love for their land and for nature and why they live there is really, to me, the most, I think, important thing in a way to folks and certainly to the reader. So kind of what happened in this community that created the fracture between property owners and the factions in a small community? It's so interesting about the complex competing interests.
Thank you. It was a great question. And I appreciate the compliment.
Sorry it took about fucking 4 minutes to land it.
No. So the first thing to say is one of the things I did expect that I was incorrect about, based on the way that the media was portraying fracking at that time. I expected to find a community split between supporters and those against. That, like, that movie Promised Land by Matt Damon came out, where there was like half the town wants this and thinks it's the greatest thing and half the town doesn't. And fracking was very uncontroversial in one regard, and the regard was pretty much everybody supported it, at least in the beginning. And like over 90% of people leased their land. Like, there were so few holdouts. And so I didn't find a community that was split between those who didn't lease and those who did, those who were against it and those who were for it. Pretty much everybody supported it. This is a very conservative area. I would argue even a libertarian area, just a real mistrust of government regulation of any kind. But going in, it's an area where most people, so like in a lot of these townships, there's almost no such thing as renters. Even poor people own property. They may be land poor because they might be a fourth or fifth generation landowner on this property. So they don't have a lot of money, but they may still own 100 acres because this was a remnant of the family farm that the great grandfather may have started that maybe was 400 or 500 acres. And so, somebody, to put it a little clearer, as you alluded to, if people don't know about how it works. So a representative of an oil or gas company knocks on your door and says, you own the mineral rights. Some people don't even know they own the mineral rights. They don't know about this up to heaven and down the hell clause. It never occurred to them how far down they own. Yeah. And the company says, if you lease it, we will give you an upfront bonus if you sign a lease. And that can be anywhere from as little as $10 an acre to as much as $5,000 an acre. It all depends on the competition. And then if we extract the resource from underneath your property, you will get royalty checks every month. And so there is a possibility to potentially make a lot of money. And so that certainly helped people say, it's an interesting, this is something I want to do.
Well, it's a really interesting thing. If you can take all the passion out of it in terms of the environmental concerns and property rights and all that. If someone just says, listen, it's like winning the lotto. It really is, because you don't have to do any work for this money. You just have to sign this to say yes and allow us to drill sometimes sideways, and you don't even see our drills sometimes in your land, and you get the money, royalties even. That's the greatest thing about being an artist. As a comedian, I get paid every time they play my stuff. And it's a weird kind of, maybe that's not so ethical because, what's it even worth? But I didn't work for that. It's like getting dividends on a stock. But you're just the landowner signing away your land. it's pretty easy for a lot of people, I'm guessing, to say,
yes.
Wait, I don't have to do anything with this money. You're just going to send me a check every month?
Yes, that's right. And again, to be clear, most people didn't get rich, but some did. So
what were they told, though, Colin? What were most people told? What was the sale? Seems like in this industry, there's a lot of way over promising and and not only under delivering, but also we're going to take your shit and you have to answer to us on your own land. Like it could be really ugly.
It can be ugly. So they were promised two things. One, they were promised that it would be minimally invasive. So this region does have a history in the past of very shallow vertical wells, which are very easy to drill. You just are poking for little pockets of gas. It's very little impact on a landowner. And so when they heard about this, they didn't really know. And the gas companies underplayed how different and how much more disruptive hydraulic fracturing is. You're talking about a well pad where you have to clear 4 to 5 acres of somebody's property, where they actually put these huge dehydrator units that burn off the wet parts of the gas on your property. So you've got these huge 6 metal sheds, burning off benzene and other carcinogens like in your backyard. And so people did not know that. They were told it's minimally invasive. They were often showed a picture of what a well pad would look like after it had been reclaimed. But what wasn't said was these wells can be productive for 40 years. And after that, we have the rights if we want to drill deeper to another shale layer. So we may even have this well pad on your property for a century. And so that was the main thing is, a lot of people did think they're going to make a lot of money. But even people that like hired a lawyer and talked to others and really sort of sussed out, some people had a sense they wouldn't get rich, but they thought it's not really going to be that disruptive.
How did this community organize to come together to hold meetings, some of which you attended and reported on, to try to understand what was happening? How did the industry itself try to be transparent when it comes into this town or other towns? Say, here we are, come to our meeting on Friday night. We're going to tell you how you can sell your land and everybody's a winner. Like, what was that? What were those? Were those meetings held? It, or was it all like word of mouth? Hey, did you hear George sold his land and he's getting this? I mean, how did it work? Top down, bottom up?
All of the above. But what everybody says first, what most people remember first was not the industry talking about what they were doing. What everybody remembers first is strange lines at the courthouse. And sometimes people wearing cowboy hats. And these were the so-called landmen who were independent contractors hired by the energy companies. And what they were doing was they were researching property deeds. Because what they want to figure out is, they want to see, Pete, for instance, if you really own the mineral rights. Most people do, but sometimes your great grandfather might have bought this property from a person who kept the mineral rights. And it may be that somebody else owned those mineral rights and you only own the surface.
Oh, that would suck.
It does suck because not only would you not get the money, but mineral rights trump surface rights in America. So there are some instances where if you didn't own your mineral rights and somebody literally tells you, we are going to drill on your property, you have no say in the matter and you won't make money from it. So you will get the ecological disturbance and you won't make money from it. But so this is what people remember. People remember these men with cowboy hats because most of them were up from Texas or somewhere lining up at the courthouse. And so the industry was not really at the beginning telling people what was going on. And then once the landmen started to make their pitch, you had a bunch of different things happen. Some people just signed and they didn't talk to anybody and they just signed. Other landowners talked to each other and said, what's going on here? Right. And what they did was they created what's called Landowner Coalitions, basically a collective bargaining unit. You want to lease me, you have to lease my friends. Together, we represent a lot of acreage, so we have some leverage. And then what happened is now it was much more, gas companies have to make a formal pitch, and some of them did this like in a firehouse, where they come, different ones, and make a pitch about how much money you'll get, the protections that they will allegedly provide for you in your contract. And so there was a variety of ways that it happened.
I want to try to paint a picture of this kind of conservative-minded man that I think a lot about, which I don't think is inaccurate. And maybe this isn't accurate, but you tell me, because I think it really is important that if I'm I live out in a rural area and I'm a landowner, and on my land, what I say goes. This is my land. I own this land and I make the rules here. This is my castle. I mean, none of this is, I think, too radical or unreasonable. This is my house. We make the decision what happens here. And there's this kind of individual attitude. If anything, this is where I have all the power here. But when I sell my land, the agreement is that you're gonna do A, B, and C. But what seems to have happened, and I want to use this kind of allegory to talk about George Hagemeyer, who you read about, because what happened with this guy is he's kind of like this guy that loves his land, never leaves his land. I don't know what his politics are, but would be pissed if anything happened to it. And all of a sudden, they're on his land and doing things on it that he can't control, including putting cameras there and driving all over the place. And he now has no rights. And I'm thinking of this guy who I'm describing to you, who now is losing rights on his own land. And that must be very, very difficult. How true is it that that's kind of what happens with a lot of these people?
It's true. It's very common. And you've pointed out very well. It's one of the most tragic ironies of this whole thing. The tragic irony is, it's this sense of land sovereignty and connectedness to the land that drives people to make a decision to lease. I mean, yes, they make money, but for a lot of people, there's a pride in their land being productive. Right. George's land. You mentioned George. It used to be farmed. He's not a farmer. He's a retired custodian, but he was proud that this was another way that the land was being made productive. He was proud to be contributing to energy for our country. Right. In that way. And he didn't ask his neighbors what they thought about it, even though it created spillover effects that impacted them. So there was and he really believed a lot of the money he actually set aside in a land trust, and his thinking was his biggest anxiety was that some of his descendants would sell the property or it would be developed. And so he tied some of his daughter's inheritance to saying, you only get the money if you keep the land intact. Otherwise, you don't get the money. And so there's this actual love of the land and this connectedness to it, and this idea that I can do whatever I want, and that this is going to help me hold on to the land. But the irony is he didn't recognize, and many people didn't, even ones who hired a lawyer, because a lot of the lawyers here, the leases were so new. This was something so new to them. These oil and gas companies have so much money to draft these leases in ways that even a lawyer can not understand how much land rights are being given away. And that George actually, the line I say in the book is, he became a tenant on his own property. So as you alluded to, he didn't know that they could withdraw water from the creek until he sees an ad in the classified section, which the company is required to run, that says, notice that, that thousands of gallons per day will be withdrawn from creek on George Hagemeyer property. That's how he finds out that they're going to start bringing down all of these trucks, dozens of tanker trucks, extracting thousands of gallons a day from his property. He walks across the well pad, which is right in his backyard, and he really just walks across it to take a shortcut to the other field. And he finds out the next day, he gets a phone call, didn't even know there was a security camera on his property, saying, you are trespassing. That well pad is ours for the duration of the lease, and you could be arrested for going in the well pad.
Imagine.
He comes back to his property one day, and there's a security guard that puts up a stop sign and basically says, you got to come back later because we're moving trucks in and out. Now, I actually understand it from a safety perspective, but believe me, the thought never occurred to him, nor would he have abided a security guard on his own property putting up a stop sign and telling him to come back later.
You say the thought never occurred to him, or that he didn't know, but I feel like that is giving him too much agency, and when in fact you're also arguing or making the point that the companies, these companies, I'll just be cynical here, but they know exactly what they're doing, and they manipulate things, and they have fine print. And I don't care how responsible you are. If you're not an educated lawyer, and even if you are, I think you just said that, he couldn't have known on purpose. They make it impossible for you to know the potential consequences of what's going to happen to your land and your life as a result.
Yes. No, you're right. It's deception. I mean, I say George didn't know, but you're absolutely right. It's not. It's deception.
Yeah, I mean, it's like people getting these loans back in 2007. Like, I actually don't blame them for taking. They were told that it would be everything would be fine. So there's so much more to talk about. We've already. I'm looking at the clock, and I'm really enjoying this. But I want to get to kind of like the debate over fracking, and what took place there, and how this is, it kind of mirrors a lot of other political issues in this country, including in Pennsylvania, like gun rights, and now we can talk about vaccine mandates. How does the debate over fracking compare to these other political issues?
It's a great question. Yeah. So I say in the book that I consider it to be perhaps the core political tension in America since the Constitutional Convention, which is how do you balance individual rights and the public good, right? And we are a country that not at every moment, but historically has come down on the side of maximizing individual rights more than most other countries. I mean, even for instance, there are limits on hate speech in other European countries that the United States does not have, right? They don't get held up. They don't get upheld in the Supreme Court. These limitations on free speech, even if they are harmful, right? And you see this with property rights. There's no other country in the world where an individual owns so much above and below the surface, right? But the way I think about this is that the reason why we have free speech, the reason why, at least on paper, I understand there's still discrimination, but on paper you can love who you want to love, worship how you want to worship, is the whole premise is that there's a private sphere which is separate from the public sphere. Because you, Pete, worshiping how you want to worship, even if I object to it, it doesn't stop me from worshiping how I want to worship, right? So we allow you to do that, and we don't put regulations on that because it doesn't infringe on my free speech, right? Your free speech does not impinge on my free speech. Now, if you want to do things that impinge on my liberty, like rob me, you can't do that. We don't give you the autonomy to rob me because that's infringing on my life and liberty, right? And so where we draw that line is actions that inhibit other people's autonomy and liberty, right? What happens with fracking, which I think is a problem, is that here we're basically treating property rights as if they were free speech. So we say, you can do what you want. George can lease his property. He doesn't have to knock on his neighbor's door. But now all of a sudden there's 200 big rig trucks driving down the road. There's all this light pollution, noise pollution, sometimes water pollution. Neighbors ought to have some say in that because that's infringing on their land rights. And how this relates to other issues, as you alluded to, it's the same thing. People say it's my right not to wear a mask and to gather indoors. I don't think that should be your right. And I think a lot of people are arguing that shouldn't be your right because that is actually literally harming somebody else's life and liberty. Some people die by your choice to congregate indoors without a mask, right? But it's the same arguments with guns. It's my right to have an automatic assault rifle, but that harms the public good, right? And we ought governments be able to eavesdrop on their own citizens without a warrant in the name of national security, right? This is a recurring political dilemma, and it's almost always about where you draw that line between individualism and the public good.
Very well said. Yeah, it's really fascinating to think about all the issues there, and they do seem to be pretty unique to America. What you just described. I mean, I feel like that's not nearly as much of an issue in Canada, even, I'm thinking of. I probably should have asked you very first, and I'm sure it's kind of the question everybody wants to know your opinion of. If you're going to write a book about up to heaven and down to hell, about the natural gas industry, and you are an environmentalist, what your view is on natural gas's contribution to the climate crisis.
Yeah, I'll start. And
I'm guessing your view is based on the scientific consensus on it, but I don't know what that is necessarily at this point, but I know it's generally perceived as pretty harmful.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I'll start with the conclusion, which is that, we got to leave it in the ground. I mean, there's no way we can burn any fossil fuel and avert catastrophic global warming. So we have to leave it in the ground. Now, to take a couple steps back from that, there does appear to be evidence, and this is what the oil and gas industry and some conservatives point to, that the onset of fracking natural gas did hasten the closing of some coal-fired electricity plants because natural gas was cheaper and easy to get. And so it did play some role in hastening the demise of coal. But the idea that fracked natural gas is a bridge fuel to renewables, you think about building out an entire infrastructure, liquefied natural gas facilities to ship this stuff all over Europe, pipelines, which we cannot just turn into transmission pipelines for windmills easily. I mean, we create all that infrastructure. That's sunk costs. I mean, we're committing ourselves to decades of burning this stuff. Yes, gas burns, quote, cleaner than coal, but it's still burning a lot. It's still emitting a lot of carbon. And importantly, and you already alluded to this, but methane, which is what natural gas is, it doesn't stay in the atmosphere as long as carbon, but when it is in the atmosphere, it's 80 times more potent than carbon. And methane leaks at every stage, from drilling to pipeline transmission. And a lot of people, it's really tough to know how much methane is leaking. We do very bad monitoring of this. But a lot of people argue that the amount of methane leakage may almost entirely be offsetting any gains of burning gas instead of coal.
Yes, very well said. And then the other, just going back real quick, not the environmental issue, but the reason why in my parents' community in upstate New York, they were able to convince people to ban fracking. Forget about what they were going to make, the money they were going to make. Forget about upper middle class area to begin with, but forget about the climate issue, the land issue, the trucks. As soon as they started talking about the trucks, everybody there was like, we live here because we like it quiet and we like the roads and we don't want to be behind big trucks. And that you didn't need to get to the next argument. Everybody there was like, no, we don't want these giant tanker trucks on our rural roads. We don't want them around. They're loud, they're smelly, they're dangerous, right? I mean, like that's a huge issue before you get to everything else. Giant trucks that the roads aren't even built for in these areas, I think.
Yeah, no, I have to say the truck traffic, I had heard about it before I moved there. I could not have anticipated.
Oh, God.
I mean, you're talking about, sometimes on gravel roads with switchbacks where, a caravan of 2 dozen tanker trucks rumbling down. Sometimes they would just, these are sometimes on roads where 2 cars have to pass each other slowly. And sometimes they just are driving right at me and I have to either pull my car in the ditch or get hit. You're talking about even the asphalt roads. They were never built for trucks like this and they would get chewed up. I mean, roads that it would have huge potholes all over them. Areas where there were times where I had to stop because the municipalities are trying to keep up with repaving them. But so then if you're not dealing with the truck traffic and having to pull over, and sometimes a road, they would close entire roads, even a road you lived on, they would close it for 8 hours while the trucks were going up and down the mountain. If you weren't dealing with that, you might have to wait because they were trying to pave the roads again, even though sometimes they were just paved 2 weeks prior. And so you get somewhere and you have to wait, 20, 30 minutes while they finish paving a section of the road so that you can go by. I mean, to frack one well one time takes 5 million gallons of water. And in most instances, that water is taken on site through tanker trucks. So you're talking hundreds of trucks just to deliver the water to frack one well one time. A well pad can hold 18 to 20 gas wells on it. That's a lot of trucks.
It really, I don't feel bad at all for the industry, but it really must be tough for the natural gas industry to combat with their propaganda the issue of the trucks and polluting the water on people's land. Those are 2 very legitimate and serious concerns before you sell your land. But of course, then we get into, just the fights with the neighbors, which, your next door neighbor wants one thing, you want another thing. And I think you do such a great job to introduce us to Cindy Bauer and the complexities of her politics and her socioeconomic status and why that matters. Tell us about her a little bit.
Sure. So Cindy, and I'm glad we already talked about George Hagemeyer because Cindy lives only 2 miles away in the same small hamlet of Trout Run. Cindy, I have to say Cindy is probably one of the most committed environmentalists I know. She participated in the first Earth Day. She was a major part of a lawsuit which was successful that sued the state of Pennsylvania for diverting royalties from drilling on state lands to the general fund, and said that money ought to be used to make up for the damage that was done to public land. She was involved in anti-fracking activism in other ways. But the interesting and she owns, her and her husband Jim own an estate about 150 acres, beautiful, stunning. The side of a mountain is wooded, and then in the middle there's this field and this large man-made pond that they constructed a chalet right on the side of the pond. And another guest house made of the reconstructed barn, and they put an easement on it to ensure its conservation. That none of the surface could ever be developed; it would remain as it is in perpetuity. And then what happened was Cindy's entire community of Trout Run became a mining town, despite what she had done. She threw, whenever the landman came knocking, she ignored them. She threw away the mailers that came. And meanwhile, she dealt with all the potholes around her. They put a well pad right across the street. You see this huge drilling rig when they were drilling right across the street from her. And even when it's done, then they flared it. And when they flare, they burn off the gas because it's not hooked up to a pipeline. It's louder than a jet engine. I mean, with the windows closed, with earplugs in, you can't sleep. Some people leave town when this happens. The whole area around her, because everybody else leased, she was dealing with all the, I don't know if I can say bullshit, right? Despite her defiance, her holding out. And she began to feel like a fool because she couldn't get the gas company to do anything about it. Like even asking, like, can you just not drive your trucks during these hours? Can you just do these little things to try to make my life better? And so it finally came to, and you alluded to, but I didn't say it. Cindy and her husband are pretty well off. He made money. He owned a number of hotels. They're now retired. But it's just they didn't need, and she admitted, we don't need the money. It's easier for us to say, no, we don't need the money from fracking, the way that George definitely needed the money. But eventually they leased their land. And I should note, they leased it with some significant restrictions.
Hold on. That was kind of undersold. Eventually, this woman who you just described sold the fuck out. Even though she didn't need to. She's an environmentalist who is rich. Why did she do it?
Yeah. So the first thing I should say, which I do think is something, is, they already had this easement from the Conservation Society. So even they were obligated to not allow the surface to be. So as you had mentioned, you could drill horizontally from underneath as long as you access the property somewhere else. So the gas company can only drill a mile underneath their property. And this was important to her. She said, not a single fern or rock can be disturbed here. But why she did it was she felt like a fool, that she hadn't stopped gas drilling in the area at all. And what she started to feel was that she was owed something. They were owed something for the 4 years of quality of life disturbances, the 4 years of the noise, the light pollution, and the entire area around her had been industrialized anyway. And so she just said, we are owed something. And the way I think about it is she viewed it as reparations, as some kind of compensation for the years of her life that she already experienced all of this stress. But the way that I talk about this more generally, because people talk about this kind of scenario as a classic resource dilemma, is, every one of us, if tomorrow, Pete, you decided I'm so concerned about the environment, I'm going to live off the grid, no electricity at all, I'm going to have a compost toilet so that I have no impact. The world
Believe
wouldn't
me,
notice.
I've watched the YouTube videos. It's not that unattractive to me.
But the world wouldn't notice. Right? If you just did that by yourself, it wouldn't make a difference. Right. It only makes a difference if millions or even billions of other people say, I'm going to join you and do that too. Right. And so people talk about this. This matters because people say, well, yes, I understand that the average American uses way more electricity and produces way more waste than the rest of the world, including other Western European countries. Yeah. But, I'm not going to sacrifice because I understand it wouldn't do anything unless everybody else did it too. And so you do it, even though it's not sustainable. And sometimes not everyone, but you might feel guilty about it. I feel guilty about it. Right. So that's the situation she finds herself in. And I think it's easy for us, for me, for you to judge her. But we actually make a similar decision all the time in other ways. Not all, but many of us are not driving an electric vehicle. Or if we are, we didn't put solar panels on our house. That electric vehicle is still being powered by dirty electricity.
Well, I have solar powers in my house and a Chevy Volt, but I eat a lot of meat. Not a lot of meat. Actually, I eat a lot of chickens. Mm-hmm. A lot. Like I eat a lot of chickens. And I do other things, but I still will judge her and everybody because I am a judgmental prick. It's my least attractive quality, but also a skill, an evil one, meaning like, my kind of moral view is, generally speaking, try not to take more than you need. And to me, it's like, it's one thing to use a gas-powered mower, which I don't. All my appliances are lithium-powered, but at the same time, why am I blowing the leaves? Like, you could just, I think about these all the time, but there's this kind of more than you need thing. And in her case, it's like, don't disturb anything that I can see, but disturb the underground, destroy all that nature underground, which there's a lot of millions of living organisms. And it's like, I don't know. I try to pretend to think like I'm an Iroquois sometimes, and I'm nothing, we're not remotely close to that, but that's the philosophy that I believe the human species needs to adhere to before we kill ourselves, which we probably will, but like not more than you need is something that none of us probably live by, but that is kind of like what the goal should be. And now I'm just rolling this out there for you to tell me in a more academic way why that's, why it doesn't work realistically, or certainly not in this country, or with, I don't know. It's, the bigger the house, the bigger the car, the more success. I mean, it's kind of uniquely American to some extent.
It is. I mean, I think, I don't know that I have an academic answer for you. I mean, I feel like I don't know how to describe it except to say that it actually is experientially. I mean, it's to say that I judged Cindy when she told me that she leased her land. But by the end of my time there, I judged her a lot less. It's that. So, for instance, I was there when they were flaring the well right across the street from her house. And it was so frightening to me that I was literally trembling as I was trying to take video of it. It was so loud and the ground was rumbling. And that's just one example. But basically, I tried to imagine if I was living with this every day for 4 years and I'm calling the petroleum company saying, you're not supposed to have those trucks here at this time. You're not supposed to be doing this. You're not supposed to be doing that. Every little thing she tried to do, she was spending hours a day fighting to try to, minimize this impact. To no avail. You just start to feel bitter and angry and entitled to something, right? Something to feel like you're like that this wasn't all for naught, and that you're not a fool. Like that thing, it's really, I mean, it's perhaps not the most useful emotion, but being embarrassed or made to feel like a fool, right? That like somebody's getting over on you. That's how they felt. They felt like, in the end, like, look at us. Like, here we are trying to take this moral stand.
They need to read more Stoicism.
The world didn't notice,
No, you illustrate it so well in the book. It's so well written and documented, and you spent time with her, and you know her, so you can have more empathy. And I'm just reading about her. As long as I don't have to see her face, I can judge her. That's where my threshold is. I'm like a banker. Like, I'll take your shit as long as I don't have to meet you. Yeah. Finally, what's the future, do you think, of this industry, given the rise of wind and solar? I mean, we are at a point now, it's been an interesting week that has just ended, where we're seeing a lot of things where we weren't sure about, whether or not, if Trump got reelected, obviously it would have been over. But like what Joe Biden has done has been far more progressive than I think a lot of people thought, especially with the environment. And then this week, a lot of major announcements, and it seems like Republicans are going to have to move on this. And for the only reason that the economics of green energy have changed so much, and with battery power and with the technologies being so heavily invested in, and now with this huge government investment like we've never seen, I feel like it's probably hard for even you, who's an expert on this stuff, to understand what this investment, what these politics mean, but more importantly, what the new economics of wind and solar especially mean for natural gas and fossil fuels in general. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. I'm pretty optimistic, a lot more than I was even just a few years ago. But for instance, because so if you ask me what the future is, I think the fossil fuel industry is toast. It's just a matter of, I don't know exactly the time scale. I don't think in the 2060s we're going to be doing this anymore. But of course we need to stop doing it a lot sooner than that. But you have two things happening. I mean, as you alluded to, on its own, economically, I mean, what's amazing is there was this report that came out recently from a policy group at Berkeley that said that by 2035, 90% of electricity could be from renewables without any increase in cost of electricity consumers. So on its own, economically, right, without even putting in using the political tools to take away, for instance, the fossil fuel subsidies, or to do something like an outright ban, which, by the way, just to say, Biden cannot ban fracking on private property. He can only ban it on public land. States can ban fracking on private property. So that's why it's just to say. Well,
you say Biden, but you mean Congress.
Well, Congress could through congressional action. I don't see that happening. So this is where, if you ask me, I do not see congressional action to ban fracking. I think
it's a state by state sitch, and we already mentioned New York and now California. That announcement that we're talking today, but we're talking about the Dakotas and Pennsylvania and Texas and Oklahoma, where the fracking is. Colorado.
And so I think it's a question of, right. And so I think most of the action around how quickly fracking is going to be shut down is going to be at the state level. And that's what you just saw with California, right? And so I think I'm optimistic because I do think we're in a race between the economics of the fossil fuel industry collapsing and the politics have turned against. I mean, it wasn't that long ago. Obama was bragging about how much he had opened up the oil and gas industry and fracking, including on federal lands. So fracking only 5-6 years ago had strong bipartisan support. That's completely crumbled. And so on both the political and the economic side, I'm pretty bullish. It's just a question of, I do think we need all the political action that Biden administration is trying to do and more because the climate situation is that dire. Right. I mean, for a major industry, for multi-billion-dollar industries, saying 15 to 20 years your industry is sunk is actually pretty quick. But for the planet, that would be disastrous. So that's why we still do need a lot of action to make this industry sunk in like 5 to 10 years, not like 25 to 35 years.
So important. Your work and this book is so great. I can't wait to read your last book, your first book. That sounds very, very good as well. The Global Pigeon. Colin Jerolmack, it's so great to meet you and to get familiar with your work. I look forward to talking to you again. This was really, really great.
Pete, I would be delighted to be back anytime. I had a lot of fun, and you've asked some smart questions.
Awesome. There you go, everybody. Colin Jerolmack, for the first time on Stand Up. His new book, So Important, Up to Heaven and Down to Hell, Fracking, Freedom, and Community in an American Town. Please go get it and say hello to him on Twitter and tell both my guests that you enjoyed me. Both Mazie Hirono and Colin Jerolmack. It'd be great if you reached out to them as always. Colin's on Twitter at Jerolmack, and of course Senator Mazie Hirono is at Mazie Hirono on Twitter. 2 new guests, 2 great guests, 2 great books, and a huge comprehensive news dump for your Monday to get you started off with hopefully a lot of information and inspiration on this final week in April, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in, for listening, for downloading, for favoriting, for giving me 5 stars and a review, and of course for signing up for a paid subscription if you haven't already. Do that now, and I will talk to you tomorrow right here on Stand Up, where I'll be joined by civil rights attorney who is fierce. Love this guy, Scott Heckinger, and also an expert on the southern border. Very few people know as much about it as Todd Miller, who will join me to talk about his new book about borders, especially ours on the southern border. That is tomorrow. Todd Miller, Scott Heckinger, both scheduled for tomorrow's show. I hope you'll listen. Thank you for your support. I love you. Goodbye. Take it away, John Carroll.
Get up off of your butt, down off of your fence, even if it ain't a very friendly audience. Well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense, and you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town, just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of a stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside. And listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up